Welcome to Deconstructing the Narrative, the part of my channel where I take a look at the story of a film and try to decide if the narrative alone is good. And today, I'm taking a look at Home Alone. It may not be the holiday season anymore, but given the fact that the eastern corner of northern Michigan, where I'm from, is still snowing, I thought, why not, right? The reason why I do Deconstructing the Narrative in general is because I actually have a pet peeve when people take a look at a movie and immediately say that the good guy's a protagonist, the bad guy's an antagonist. And in the case of Home Alone, they say that Kevin is the protagonist, the wet bandits are the antagonists. No! Actually, you're completely wrong there. Kevin is not the protagonist or antagonist, and neither is the wet bandits. But how could that be? Because you're disregarding every other character in the film, you're disregarding the story problem at hand, you're disregarding everything just to say that the good guy's the protagonist and the bad guy's the antagonist. Now look, I will agree with you that Kevin is the good guy and the wet bandits are the bad guys. But that doesn't make them the protagonist or the antagonist. That just makes them a couple of really important characters. So if they aren't, then who is? Well, first, you have to ask yourself, what is the protagonist trying to do? The protagonist in any given story is trying to fix the problem at hand. Well, what's the problem at hand? The problem at hand should be something that affects literally every character in the story, whether they know it or not. It's something called the initial inequity. It's essentially a rift, right? Something was normal, and now it's not anymore. And it affects everybody. It's a disturbance in the force, so to speak. So what's the disturbance in the force of Home Alone? It's the title of the movie, Home Alone. Kevin is left home alone. This event changes everything for every character, whether they know it or not. For Kevin, it's obvious. His entire life has changed. He can no longer expect other people to do things for him. He has to do things for himself. It also affects his family trying to vacation in Paris. Now they can't. They can't because now they have to go back home because they accidentally left a kid at home, right? It also affects the wet bandits because normally they probably would have had an in and out job. They would have gone into this house, robbed them blind, and left. But they can't do that now because Kevin's there. So him being there, being left home alone, affects every single character. That is why it's the initial inequity. That's why it's the problem at hand. The protagonist has one job. Their job is to fix the inequity and bring it back to a state of normalcy. So if the problem is the fact that Kevin's left home alone, the protagonist must make sure that Kevin is no longer home alone. There's only one character in this entire movie who's trying to make sure that Kevin is no longer home alone, and that is Kevin! Kevin's mom. You may think I'm crazy all you want, but Kevin's mom is the protagonist of Home Alone because she is the only one in the entire family who has this ethical, moral, personal value system in getting back to her son. You know, watching the movie, that everybody in that family has to get back home. But a majority of them are completely fine waiting until the next day to get a flight back home. The mom is not. The mom is adamant about doing it right now. It actually makes her a really strong protagonist at that. So if we know who the protagonist is, and we know their goal, then we now know who the antagonist is. The antagonist is written to be diametrically opposed to the protagonist's goal, specifically the protagonist's goal. That is why it cannot be the wet bandits, because the wet bandits have no idea that the mom is trying to get back home. No idea. So they cannot be against that. The only person or thing in this case that is against her going back home, call me crazy again if you want, but it's Christmas. The mom tries to call the police to check up on her son. They can't do it. They're too busy. It's Christmas season. Then she tries to get a first-class plane ticket back home that night. But she can't because they're too busy. It's Christmas. Christmas is the force, essentially, that stops this mom from getting back to her son right now. It's a constant thing. They are the two battling forces of the film that keeps Kevin where he's at and keeps the problem existing. So if she's the protagonist and Christmas is the antagonist, then what the heck is Kevin? And what the heck are the wet bandits? Because they are indeed very important characters. Kevin is what we call a main character. Now, wait a second. You said that he's not. No, I said that he's not the protagonist. He can still be the main character, and the main character is often seen as the same thing as the protagonist. That's when it's called a literary hero. but they don't have to be the same character. The main character's job is one thing and one thing only, to be the heart and the soul of the film. And most oftentimes, the main character has a personal journey that they have to go through that is not connected to anything else but themselves. And they have to finish this personal journey before the story goal can be met. Kevin's personal journey, or his attitude, is just that he hates his family. He has this resentment towards them. You see this in the beginning of the movie, all the way basically to the end of the film. He wishes that they disappear, and they do essentially. And he's happy with that too. This is a point of view situation. It does not change until the end of the film, where he finally realizes that he needs his family, he misses his family, he loves his family, but it takes a while to get there. Why? Because of the wet bandits. Now, the wet bandits are what we call contagonists. What are contagonists? They are essentially speed bump characters. They are placed in the film for our main character to run into and to delay their essential growth, or their eventual growth. That's essentially why Kevin doesn't immediately go from hating his family and wishing they disappear to missing them and loving them a lot quicker than he does, because he has to deal with these wet bandit characters first. And as we all know, he eventually does deal with the wet bandits, and then he misses his family. His family shows up because he completed his personal journey first. The movie has all these elements, has all these forces at work that make it a really strong, captivating, unique story. The one thing that it does not have, unfortunately, is an influence character. Now, an influence character is essentially a character or a point of view that forces the main character to confront their personal problems. Nothing does that for Kevin. He kind of gets there on his own due to time and distance. Distance makes the heart grow fonder, as we all know. That's fine. But usually in a movie like this, you have a character that forces the main character to confront those personal problems that they have. They could have easily done that in this movie, though, with the snow shoveling, scary neighbor guy. They almost had it. But the problem was, before Kevin ever realizes that this guy is actually a nice, misunderstood guy, he's already accepted the fact that he misses his family. He's already gotten to the point in his life where he has already confronted his own problems and has already accepted them. So the neighbor can no longer be an influence character, which is weird, because Kevin acts like an influence character for him. We learn in this scene in a church that this misunderstood, scary neighbor guy had a falling out with his son, and Kevin's like, why don't you just call him? He forces this guy to confront his own problem, which is exactly the job of an influence character, which is so strange. It could have been the other way around, but it wasn't, because Kevin had already gotten there. Instead, I feel like Home Alone has these 3 consecutive scenes that are played out in reverse, or they should have been. If you watch Home Alone, watch it intently during this sequence. The first scene, he runs into Santa Claus, or the fake Santa Claus, which is where he wishes that his family is returned to him because he actually misses them. The next scene, directly after that, he goes and walks down a street and he sees a family gathering together having a Christmas party, and he misses his family. Third scene is that church scene with the neighbor. Now let's reverse it. Let's say that he first met the neighbor at the church, and instead of him being the influence character for the neighbor, let's say that the neighbor was the influence character for Kevin and said, listen, you need your family because I miss my own. Don't be like me. Love your family and be there for them. After the church scene, let's have Kevin walk outside and see that house with the family having a party. And he realizes he misses his family indeed, like the old man said. The old man kind of put the seed in his head that he misses his family. The next scene after that, finally it comes to a head. He sees Santa Claus and he makes that wish. That's how I would have written it. In that case, it would have had an influence character and it would have every aspect that's needed for a perfect narrative. Instead, if I had to rate the narrative for Home Alone, I would probably say, 9 out of 10. Nearly perfect, could have had an influence character easily, but just doesn't. But the point of all of this is just to remind you that characters in a film, archetypes if you will, they don't have to be one way and one way only. The good guys don't have to be the protagonist. The bad guys don't have to be the antagonist. In fact, they could do things different as long as those roles are fulfilled. And they are fulfilled in Home Alone for the most part. They just aren't fulfilled in the way that you think.